Hi, and welcome to our first webinar of 2023. We're going to kick it off with STEM Lyceums, a lesson in flight, where we'll have speakers talk about aerospace. And so the Center for Excellence in Education was founded in 1983 by Joanne DeGennaro and Admiral Rickover, the father of the nuclear navy and civilian uses of nuclear power. The center's mission is to nurture high school and university scholars to careers of excellence in leadership in STEM, and to encourage international collaboration between and among leaders in the global community. There are 4 cost-free programs: the Research Science Institute, USA Bio Olympiads, the Teacher Enrichment Program, and STEM Lyceums. RSI is a highly competitive summer program where students go out to MIT and they live and learn in coursework. It's open to current juniors, so if you're a rising high school senior, and this combines on-campus coursework in scientific theory with off-campus work in science and technological research. If you're interested, you can go ahead and scan the QR code at the bottom, and towards the end of the event, Sidharth is actually going to speak about his experience. Bio Olympiads is a series of exams that are open to any high school student, so these are excellent preparation for AP biology courses. The top 20 go on to attend the national finals at Marymount University, and the top 4 from there will go on to compete at the United Arab Emirates. So congratulations to anybody who took it on the February 2nd exam. I'm sure you all did really well. The registration for 2023 is now closed, but if you're interested, scan the QR code and you can visit CEE's website for teacher and student resources. I'm going to introduce Adiola to talk about the Teacher Enrichment Program.
Hi, everyone. The Teacher Enrichment Program serves rural and urban teachers all over the country. Right now, we're in multiple states. TEP provides opportunities for middle and high school teachers to connect with leading experts from industry and academia, explore cutting-edge research and development, and make meaningful professional links with direct benefits for teachers and students. We have a lot of fun events planned out for the rest of the year. We actually just had a virtual Light of Science STEM Sports webinar, and which was a really great turnout and super awesome. So if you're interested in things like that, or if you think your teachers would be interested in events like that, make sure to send them program information. Enjoy the webinar.
And STEM Lyceums is why we are all here today. This is a virtual club for high school students to learn about STEM concepts and career pathways from top industry professionals. This is our schedule for the upcoming webinars we have. We'll be talking about STEM in policy on March 10th and engineering a sustainable future on Earth Day. So right before Earth Day on April 21st. And if you have any questions about joining STEM Lyceums, you can reach out to me, the program manager. There's an opportunity for students to apply to be STEM ambassadors. And so these are students who work really closely with me. We have about 10 right now, and you are able to submit a student recap for the newsletter. It's a really great way to kind of stay involved with everything at the center. So I'm going to introduce the 3 panelists we have. We have Mary Beth Lilly, who's the Manager of Talent and Workplace Policy at AIA, Grace Wilson Jackson, who's a real-time spacecraft engineer at NASA, and a Brooke Owens Fellow. And then we have Sidharth Anantha, who is an RSI alumni from the class of 2019, and current student at the University of Michigan.
My name is Mary Beth Lilly, and I work for Aerospace Industries Association as their talent and workforce policy manager. We are a Washington, D.C. based association that represents over 300 member companies, ranging from the very largest aerospace companies that might be household names for you to small mom and pop shop companies that produce specialty items that help support the industry's supply chain. Before I dive into my background, how I got here, and sort of frame what's possible for you all within the industry as you explore what future careers might look like, I wanted to solicit some ideas from the brilliant minds we have attending here today with 2 initial questions to start get your brains working. So you're going to see a QR code up on the screen pop up, and feel free to use your smartphone or another device you might have to respond to the following 2 questions. So first off, would love to hear from you all. What are some of the first words or concepts that you think of when you think of aerospace? So you can use that QR code or that website there in the code, and some of your responses will populate up here. So this could be a concept, a company, a product, anything you're thinking of when you think of aerospace. So we'll give folks a few seconds to put some ideas in the chat via Slido here. Astronauts, stars, absolutely. All of those outer space items. Northrop Grumman is a very large company within the space industry. NASA is one of our government partners that helps make some of that exploration possible. Got a few of those coming in. See some folks typing, so we'll get their fingers in time. SpaceX, another private company, absolutely. Rockets, airplane, F-35 from Lockheed, absolutely. So I think what we're seeing here is sort of the range of items when we think of aerospace. What does it mean? What is a part of it? It is absolutely outer space via NASA and some of the rockets and missiles and exploration items, but it's also when we think about our aviation system, all of that falls into aerospace as well. So we'll move on to the next item as the last items come in here, which is what are some possible careers that you think of when you think of working potentially in the air? What kind of jobs are out there? What kind of work might you be doing? Astronaut is definitely the first one we think of, right? Those astronauts and rocket scientists that sort of underpin that. Aerospace engineers, absolutely. Different types of engineers fall into that as well. Pilots, absolutely critical to making sure folks are getting safely from point A to point B in our aviation. Technicians are so important as well to make sure the maintenance side of things are happening appropriately. Avionics, maintenance tech, absolutely. Teachers, they are a big part of this too. Thank you, whoever put that in the chat. We need folks that are going to help mold these great minds to be the next engineers and technicians and help inspire folks to see themselves within the air. Absolutely. We'll give those folks typing a few more moments and then we'll dive into sort of my career and how I got here today and sort of what the industry and world of possible and the way to what's next within the industry looks like. Absolutely, we got some really specific items, physics, fluid dynamics, data analysts. There's so much data that goes into aerospace careers, but also that we're learning from aerospace careers. So that is a great one. All right, well, thanks for participating. Love to get some crowd participation here. So like I said, my name is Mary Beth Lilly. I manage AIA's talent and workforce policy portfolio, which means that I help companies help find the talent they're looking for, think through strategy to make that an effective practice, but also think about what the employee experience folks are going to have within A&D is. How are you feeling a sense of belonging at the company? How are you finding purpose in the work that you're doing? And how are we cultivating a workforce as a whole that looks and feels like the societies that we live in? So I get to do a lot of fun work on that recruiting and attraction piece, but also thinking through the way we think about work has really changed within the past 2 years. And you think about your future career 2 years ago, it might have looked a little different pre-pandemic and just the way we're approaching work. So wanted to share a bit about my STEM journey and how I got here. I'm not in a technical role now, but that didn't mean I was not a proud STEM lover growing up. I self-identified as a nerd as a child. My favorite class was math. I could do absolutely anything to learn more, know more, which continued through sort of my upbringing, my education, and where I ended up in college and grad school. So this was me at my high school education. I was much more youthful and had a few different hair colors ago. But you'll see me with my older sister. We have about 10 years between us. And I was absolutely the annoying kid sister that when we were doing homework together at the kitchen table, I wanted to know what it was. So I was middle schooler that was like, what's calculus? But it helped me see what was possible for myself. So when I graduated high school, I went to the University of Delaware for undergrad and started as an energy policy major. So I was really interested in chemistry and the way things worked from an energy both production side, but also delivery. But as some of you may find out, if you're in college, your interests change and what's available to you changes. So made a few quick left turns throughout my college experience and ended up graduating with a degree in applied economics and energy policy with minors in math and organizational leadership. So really kept that enthusiasm for learning throughout and was able to blend these different and disparate points of what I was interested in and how math and STEM really shaped what I ended up doing educationally throughout college. After college, I worked on a campus actually within their student affairs department at a STEM-based university focusing on science degrees, helping with college planning and career planning of what does other students' STEM journeys look like. So I went back to grad school at Villanova University, go Wildcats, which finally brought me here to AIA, where I'm getting to help support that future workforce as well as the current one, which is really the heart and soul of the aerospace industry and what we're able to do. So a bit about AIA, we're really happy to be at our core as an association, and we're working day in and day out to create policy and a policy ecosystem that is able to support our nation's security and a really thriving, innovative, and growth-oriented aerospace industry. This industry is responsible for some of the nation's most impressive feats in history. Transatlantic flight back in the day, landing man on the moon, exploring really the deepest corners of our world in outer space. And in the future, there's so much still left to do. So whether that's returning to the moon or exploring Mars, or just continuing our legacy of safe and secure air transport, this industry is integral in the ability to do so. But all of that is only possible by really creating a dynamic and diverse workforce that's going to help make those innovations possible. So collaboration and having that sense of belonging that you all are one day able to come into a company and into a role that you're able to bring your full self to work and use your experiences and your background to help this industry reach its fullest potential. So one of the items that AIA is most well known for is our annual facts and figures report. So just as a quick visual, you're able to see some of the people and the folks and the work that really goes into this industry. There is a place for everyone and a type of work for everyone here in some of those engineering roles and technician roles that you all had shared earlier, but also in the host of other services and provisions that helps this industry be able to sustain itself and really get into the important work that they're doing. So to put some numbers behind it, because I told y'all I was a numbers gal, a career in aerospace also presents the opportunity for really good jobs. So in a post-pandemic world, when commercial air travel slowed, we're rebounding to that and are about 2.1 million workers across the US working specifically in aerospace, just under 1.5% of the US workforce. And on average, the wages within the aerospace industry are over 40% higher than a job outside. So when you're thinking about your path, there's the ability to really have a sustainable career, not just a job. So thinking about all those other elements that come into having a sense of purpose and being able to sustain that within your own life. Part of the reason this industry has sort of the size and the range of footprint it has is what makes it so successful, whether it's aviation or space or some of the UAS and advanced air mobility items. I want to touch on two sectors briefly just to give you sort of a flavor of what's next and what you might be helping to create. Is when we think about advanced air mobility and unmanned aircraft. So the idea of flying taxis and having unmanned systems that are able to provide some of our telecom items, high-risk jobs that folks don't have to physically do anymore. I'm thinking about firefighting and search and rescue here, some inspection items. The aerospace industry is helping to innovate how to do so more efficiently, more safely through some really cool technology. Advanced air mobility is one item that gets me really excited. So knowing about in the not too distant future, our world is going to be much more interconnected than it currently is. We might be able to call, an eVTOL or flying taxi in the same way that we call an Uber and a Lyft, and fundamentally change the way we get around our world and our cities and our communities here. Space is another item that has high growth and high innovation right now, which I think is probably what is exciting many of you to think about what a career in aerospace might look like. When we think back to 1969 on July 21st, when we landed on the moon and man first walked there, it's so amazing to see the strides this industry has made via the space shuttle program and the International Space Station, and most recently this fall with the Artemis first mission. So on the right, over 3,800 companies and countless thousands of employees were able to have that made possible for us with the innovation behind the Orion capsule and the SLS rocket. and even the spaceport down at Kennedy Space Center that has some of the infrastructure that made it possible. So the Artemis program will land the first woman and the first person of color on the moon in the next few years, using some really innovative technologies to explore more of that lunar surface than ever before, establish the first permanent presence on the moon, and learn what we're taking there to the next giant leap, which is going to be Mars. Exploration and travel is sort of one piece of it, but research is also another large area demonstrated by the James Webb Space Telescope. So James Webb is the largest optical telescope in space right now that have the ability to provide really high resolution and high sensitivity views and items back to researchers here that may have been too old or too distant or too faint for the Hubble to have seen previously. So over 300 universities, companies, and organizations were a part of this. And as I'm sure you may have seen in the news, the first images to come back and the ones that continue to come are just so awesome in the truest sense of the word, knowing what we're learning and what we're able to see. So the side-by-side comparison of what James Webb on the right is providing back versus what we known previously really just helps to push forward that world of possible for us as we can continue to consider what aerospace is going to look like in the future. Which leads us to the way to what's next. So I am a firm believer that our future workforce is that what's next for us, and y'all are going to help push the button on what's possible when it comes to innovation. There are so many opportunities out there for you that you may already have an idea of, or you might just starting to ideate on, which is exciting. So this is a non-exhaustive list of careers you might have, skills you might want to develop, or places that you might be looking to as a future employer. So just to demonstrate that range of it, now is a great time to start thinking about the way to what's next for you and what you want to do as a career moving forward. And I think there's the idea of putting career planning and that big dreams out there, big audacious goals into practice. So some of those options can be overwhelming and sort of all that's available to you. How are you really honing in on what that is? Especially as a high school student, you have a lot of big decisions on your horizon. Does that look like college? Is it a certificate? Is it entering into the workforce? So right now, my best advice is to just increase your exposure of what you know and what you can know to help make the best choice for you. Events like this are a phenomenal first step of making those connections with folks. I'm always willing to help anyone, chat with anyone, talk about what's next for them. But maybe that's a summer program or something local in your area. Virtual events are a great idea just for you to see what all encompasses an industry or a specific type of work that you might be interested in. Once you have that exposure, you'll have some big decisions ahead of you, like I mentioned. Where do you start? What are you going to do? Who can you rely on to ask questions and get advice? Can you be looking for a mentor or someone in your community that can help you with some of that planning? And all of that culminates in experience, right? You need to validate that interest in what you might plan to do with whether you like it and whether you're finding value in it. So whether that be a company-sponsored high school internship, which is really becoming popular within the industry now, or a STEM-oriented club on your school, or virtually here, seeking out those experiences to help you make informed choices are really integral in figuring out what's for you. And one example that I would be remiss if I didn't plug was AIA's American Rocketry Challenge. So the American Rocketry Challenge is the world's largest rocket contest with nearly 5,000 students nationwide competing every year. This is for middle and high school students in teams, which gives them the opportunity to design, build, and launch model rockets and really get hands-on experience solving engineering problems in a competitive yet fun environment. So in team settings, groups spend time throughout the year perfecting their rocket and holding test flights to hopefully qualify for our national fly-offs at the Plains, Virginia, which you'll see over on the right. So this year we have over 800 teams competing for those final 100 spots in the national fly-off. And AIA connects teams with industry mentors that are able to help them with the science of it, but also the relationship building piece and really succeed and compete on their own terms at those highest levels. So I've been talking a lot here. I'm going to pause and pass it over to Erica for our next speaker, my former colleague, who can give some ideas on putting that experience into practice.
So much for that, especially kind of giving an introduction to career planning and what that really looks like. It's so important. So I wanted to introduce Grace Wilson, who's going to talk about what all of this looks like in practice, kind of gaining that experience and then moving into the career field. So Grace, take it away.
Yes, hello. I'm so excited to be here. I want to give a quick disclaimer that I decided to take this call from a park because I was like, oh, it's a beautiful day. But some children have started playing soccer. So if you hear screams, they're screams of Jubilee, not of like, I don't know, something bad. But hello, my name is Grace. I use she, her pronouns, and I am here to talk to you a little bit about my journey. And then I'm going to have to pop off before the formal Q&A. So hopefully I'll talk really briefly and then y'all can help direct my further comments with some questions. So Mary Beth, if you could hit the next slide. So my life in a series of selfies is on this slide. I graduated from Wellesley College, which is a small liberal arts school in Boston, in May. And I graduated with a degree in peace and justice studies and astrophysics. So I did not get an engineering degree. I really got the liberal arts experience where there was lots of exploration, and I entered as a political science major. So Mary Beth and I are on the same page that majors can change, and that's okay. I then spent the summer working with Mary Beth and all of her wonderful colleagues at AIA as a Brooke Owens Fellow. This is a fellowship designed to place female and non-binary students in the aerospace industry with well-paying summer internships, gives them mentorships and opportunities to build community and find some sort of cohort within an aerospace industry, which is very dominated by men. And it was a wonderful experience, not only with the fellowship, gaining that mentorship and that community, but also within AIA. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I had just graduated college. And AIA, because they are so involved with so many different corners of the industry, allowed me to really explore all of those possibilities and get a sense of really every single opportunity that laid in front of me. And in mid-July, was having a conversation with someone I met through AIA and mentioned that I worked in the theater as a stage manager, which is a weird cross between like a team mom and a chief of staff for a theatrical production. And they were like, oh my gosh, I did theater. I love stage managers. You should be an operations engineer. And I was like, cool, what's that? And I did some research and I was like, oh, I should be an operations engineer. She's so right. And so I started applying to operations jobs, which led me to my current role at Goddard Space Flight Center, which is a NASA facility right outside DC. I am a real-time spacecraft engineer, which basically means I sit in a mission control for a satellite, and it's our job to drive the bus. But the bus is a satellite currently in orbit, studying the sun. It is so much fun. It is a really dynamic job where every day is different, which is exactly what I was looking for. And it's at NASA, which is just such a dream come true. So with that was a very brief life story. What, if you want to drop in the chat or Q&A, what piques your interest? What do you want me to talk more about? What questions do you have? And Mary Beth, if you go to the next slide, there is my LinkedIn and my email. So if you have a question you want to ask later, please do. Just shoot me an email. I'm happy to answer them.
Little bit of a lag because the Q&A function is a little bit different in a webinar. The participants can't just send a question in the chat openly. So okay. Yeah, we can definitely give the space for a few minutes for this, and then maybe while Sid's talking, and then come back to it if there are some that pop up before you have to leave.
Okay, that sounds great. Yeah, that's me.
Am I good to go? All right, let me share my screen real quick. isn't this working? Okay, can you see my slides? Oh, actually, the whole, like the full view, or does it show?
We can
Sorry,
see your
Sorry,
I didn't
presenter.
right.
hear that.
Yeah,
Oh,
right
presenter
now.
view. Okay, let's see. Let me do the screen share. It's not letting me share the whole screen for some reason. Okay, can you see the full view now? Awesome. All right. So my name's Sidharth. I'll just kind of continue. I think actually a lot of the other panelists have talked a bit about what I was going to say, but I'll continue on with this and talk a bit more about aerospace. Just about me, I'm a junior in undergrad, like an undergrad junior at university right now, studying aerospace and CS. So I'm a little, I might be a little young, the youngest person here, so a little closer to your guys' age. I've been at school for like 2.5 years now, and I've done a few internships as well. And I'll just talk a bit about, I guess, overall what the industry is about, where it's going, and a bit about my professional journey as well. So a bit of an overview. Think about aerospace. I like to think of it as air and space and defense. And there's really 3 big sectors of it. And I'll talk a bit about each of those. So let's talk first with aviation. So let's think about what the problems in aviation today. Aircraft are massive carbon polluters. That's one thing. Some of the solutions around this are using sustainable aviation fuels, which we'll talk about, also making aircraft electric, and even trying to make, another issue is that aircraft are also not autonomous. So you need a pilot to fly each airplane, but that's slowly starting to change with autonomy. Additionally, aircraft are also slow, because if you remember before, we used to have the Concorde, where we could get between New York and London in just a couple hours, but that's not there anymore. But glad to say that's coming back. So first we can talk about carbon zero aviation. So this is trying to make sure that aviation is sustainable. So one option, which seems the most obvious, is make it electric, right? It's been done with cars, why can't it be done with planes? The problem is that with aircraft, you have to carry your batteries up. And it takes a lot of energy to do that because your batteries are heavy. Now, if you need to carry the weight of your batteries, you're using energy to carry that weight. So the more energy you need, the heavier of a battery you need, which means the more energy you need to burn to carry that. So as a result, there's a limit to how far you can actually travel, but on an electric aircraft. And really, we can't go that long. We can't go long distances. However, there is a use for electric aircraft in short haul flights. So this may not be like DC to Chicago, but it might be DC to New York, a quick hop that's maybe less than an hour. That's a perfect example of where electric aircraft can be used. And also, Mary Beth talked about this, but you can have sky taxis or like Ubers that you can call, and you can do short hops with an electric air taxi like that. So that I think is really promising, and it's going to start coming up soon. Now that is for short haul travel. What about if you want to fly from DC to Tokyo? What are we going to do about that? So one thing is we can use sustainable aviation fuel. So normal jet engines like we have today, it works the same way, except the fuel we're burning, rather than being fossil fuels that are non-renewable, you can get them from sources that are such as cooking oil or even carbon captured from air. And another promising source that's coming up now is hydrogen. So you might hear a lot about hydrogen fuel cells. These can be used inside of airplanes and can power the engines. So a bit on the next topic, which is autonomous aviation. The important thing is that regulation is slowly changing. It's very slow, but every couple of years, there's slight changes in the rule. Now it makes it a little easier for us to fly drones or airplanes without much regulation. Really pushing back on us. So I think in the future, what we'll definitely have are those like commercial, like Uber air taxis, where you can literally call an Uber and say, like, if you're in New York, right? If you're in Manhattan and you go to the airport, it's an hour-long drive. So what you can try to do is literally call a taxi, and this taxi will land maybe on the top of a building or on a small like pier on the water, and you can just hop in, and then it's an electric pilot, and it will whisk you away to JFK Airport in like 15 minutes. So that I think was a promising step. Another one also is autonomous drone delivery. Companies like Amazon are working on this. There's actually another company that's using it for critical blood delivery in Africa, where there's no roads. They have these autonomous drones, and they'll basically fly them and try to land them right by, drop off a package right by a delivery point, so that you can move critical, like time-sensitive supplies very fast. And this is slowly growing, but eventually it's going to get to the point where you can have autonomous long-haul travel. So I'd probably start off with cargo because there are no humans on it, but you'll have these aircraft that are moving and shuffling cargo around. And eventually, as it gets more and more widespread, we'll get to the point where we'll get on a plane and there won't even be a pilot. Now, but that's very far in the future, but definitely is going to happen soon. Now, the other thing that's really exciting is supersonic aircraft. So with electric aircraft, it will undoubtedly be slower, but can we fly faster? Now, supersonic aircraft is making a hugely strong comeback. In fact, I think it's like probably the most exciting aspect of it right now, of the aviation industry right now. So there's a lot of demand and especially a lot of money to fly time-critical freight and business travelers, super and hypersonic. So if you think about it, think about the president of the United States, right? He or she has to go to so many meetings across the world, and they only have limited time. And their time is probably some of the most valuable time on the planet. So in that case, you can have, that's where supersonic air travel makes sense, because they're willing to pay the premium despite how expensive it is. If it means that they can go from DC to Paris in just 3 hours, they'll take that and they'll pay that price. And there are a lot of people who think the same way. And because of that, supersonic air travel is really going to be, I think, one of the biggest futures of the aviation industry. So, of course, we also need to talk about the defense industry. Defense is actually probably the bigger part of the aerospace industry, although it's generally pretty hush-hush, so you don't hear too much about it. But that being said, the future of defense also is pretty quiet because the government's not really going to tell us what all the top secret projects. But I guess just based on inference of where trends are going, we can kind of try to predict it. So one big trend that's happening is hypersonic missile development. So if you think about a typical intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM, these are launched from either the air, the water, or the land, and they basically will fly up in a ballistic trajectory. I don't know if any of you guys have taken physics yet. They basically fly up, and then they'll coast through the upper atmosphere and eventually go down and fall and hit the ground. But the problem is that from the minute you fire it, you know exactly the path it's going to take. So say another country fires a missile on us, we can track the missile, see its velocity, and we know exactly where it's going to be until it hits the ground. So we can send an interceptor that can go, and as the missile is flying, it will hit the missile and destroy it. So the hypersonic missiles, they are different because they go so fast that an interceptor can't get there in time, and it's hard to track. And they can also take unpredictable tracks, where rather than taking a very straightforward track, they can fly in the air and suddenly zigzag through the atmosphere. So the US actually is playing catch up right now. China and Russia have developed their whole hypersonic program further along than the US has. So the US is investing tons of money into this to make sure that we don't fall behind our adversaries. And the goal is that we can have hypersonic technology for military purposes, but also eventually being used for commercial purposes. So the same stuff I talked about, supersonic air travel, once hypersonic is safe enough, they're going to be using flying passengers hypersonically, or maybe cargo first and then passengers. But if you think about it, you can get to London in less than an hour, which is insane. So another thing in defense that's especially pretty cool is that they're going to be is what's called guided interceptor missiles. So if you see this picture here on the bottom, this is actually a picture in, I think this is Tel Aviv, Israel, but they have this system that's called Iron Dome. So the way it works is that if there's a rocket or a missile fired towards the target, like how I was saying, if you can track the trajectory of the missile, you can shoot another missile and catch it. But they're going to have to start upgrading this system for hypersonic missiles, so that you have to find a way to somehow intercept a missile that it's going too fast to intercept, and is also taking a path that's too unpredictable. So that's a pretty cool application that a lot of people are working on. And obviously, you won't really hear much about it until it's fully developed, but it's pretty awesome. The last thing that I think personally is pretty cool is military satellites. So if you think about Star Wars, we're starting to get there now. So the US, China, and Russia, they have so many military satellites in space. And while some of these are used to spy down on Earth, I have a feeling that a small fraction of these satellites are actually used to spy on other satellites. Because if you think about it, when a satellite's in space, you can actually go up to it. There's nothing protecting the satellite. So say Russia has a satellite that's spying on Area 51, and they're seeing all the secretive stuff, or maybe the aliens there, and we don't want them to see that. So we can send another satellite that can go meet up with the Russian satellite, and maybe it can just like drill into it and destroy it, or it can connect to it and install malware and shut it down. That might be one of the other steps that the defense industry is going in. Now we'll talk about space. This presentation will be fairly space heavy. That's just because my background's mostly in space, but I'll just get right into it. So right now we're in the era of the new space industry. So previously, space travel was unbelievably expensive. Rockets, they're single use, and contracts are written, so there's not really an incentive to produce them cheaply and quickly, because everyone just assumed, you know, the rocket industry is very expensive and takes a long time. Now, how expensive would it be if every time we fly, we have to build a new airplane, right? Imagine we fly from DC to London and we throw the airplane away. So then if you have like, if you're the only one flying, the cost to fly there is the cost of the aircraft itself and all the fuel. And so at that point, no one would ever travel, because it would make no sense, right? You're spending like $2 million to build something and then immediately throw it away. But that's what the aerospace industry has been since like the beginning of the industry. They've always been launching a rocket and they've assumed that it's too difficult to save it, so they just throw it away. So the critical innovation that's happened is that they're starting to reuse these rockets. So if you see this picture here, I assume many of you might have seen it before, but this is a picture of two rockets. They're actually coming back and landing. So these two are Falcon Heavy sidecores. They launch like maybe 10 miles away from the site. They actually go into space. They're flying crazy fast, and they'll turn around and come back to Florida and land just a few miles from the launch site. And it's really cool to see that launch. I've actually seen one of these launches a few months ago. And it's watching them come down. It's surreal. It's unlike anything else. But the important thing is that now that you can reuse it, once you build it once, you can use it multiple times. So if you think about it, if you pay $1,000 for the rocket, you're splitting that across multiple launches. So the cost per launch, if you split it across 10 launches, that's $100 per launch. That's so much cheaper. So the other thing is that satellites are becoming smaller. So there's this principle called Moore's law, which is that electronics are more and more, as time goes on, electronics get more compact and more powerful. And as a result, satellites are becoming smaller and lighter. So the same satellite that needed to be the size of a car, now it can literally be the size of this. The scale, it's a little hard to tell, but the satellite's literally this big. And you can run scientific experiments, but you can even like provide satellite internet, or fit a camera there and use it as a spy satellite. But it's such a small form factor. And most importantly, it's very low mass. So in a given rocket, instead of launching one satellite that's really big, you can now launch 100 satellites that are very small. So it's really become a lot cheaper to launch satellites, and space has become more accessible. As a result, there's a lot more demand to do this, and more people want to start paying for launches to space. So if you look at the launch industry today, those are all innovations that happened in the last 10 years. If you look at it today, nowadays there are, I think, I don't know the exact number for global launches, but in the last year, SpaceX, which is the leader in the industry, they had launched 62 times in 1 year, which is an insane cadence, because I think it's like they make up 95% of all launches in the US. Additionally, there's also space travel a space travel market that's opened up for high-paying people. So if you remember last year, Jeff Bezos actually went to space. He went with this company, Blue Origin, and now every year, a couple times a year, they're taking people who pay a ton of money, but they'll take them up to space and let them fly on a joyride. So additionally, the important thing is that all the rocket boosters are, for the most part, they're mostly reusable. So you can build that one thing and fly it 10 times, and you split the cost across 10 launches. And additionally, there are tons of new rocket companies. 20 years ago, there was only one company, and it was Boeing and Lockheed Martin. But now there are big companies, small companies, there are a bunch of startups. Really, like a lot of small companies are going out and building rockets and are actually launching them and being successful. So that's really exciting to see. Now, looking forward to tomorrow, the launch industry is going to really be dictated by large volume rockets. So if you think about it, a private jet it may be cheaper to operate than a 747. Like a 747, there's 4 engines, it takes so much fuel, you have to spend so much money to fly it. But you can fit like 5 people in a private jet, but you can fit 300 people in a 747. So even if the cost of something is 10 times more, If you're splitting it across 100 people, it's actually 10 times cheaper per person. So the idea is that if we create these bigger, fully reusable rockets, then it's going to be significantly cheaper per kilogram of mass. So if you think there's a bunch of companies that are doing this principle, I think the one that's most developed right now is Starship. So this is a rocket that SpaceX is developing. This is out in South Texas. But basically, the idea is that you can launch massive payloads, like 4 times heavier than what's currently launched on the existing rockets of today. And the important thing is that you launch and land them really quickly. So it's fully reusable, meaning that you build the hardware only once and you can use it hundreds of times. And the important thing is that you can launch it rapidly. So right now, every time a rocket launches and comes back, it takes about a couple weeks to a month to go through, refurbish it, make sure everything isn't broken, and check everything out and go back and launch it. The idea is that you're going to launch this rocket. It's going to come back down within 10 minutes. You're going to fuel it up, and within an hour, you're going to launch it again. So it's really trying to make space travel what air travel is today. That idea of you get on a plane, you fly somewhere, the minute you get off the plane, they're already cleaning it up and getting it ready for the next flight. And that's really where the future is going. And that's really exciting to see. So you build a rocket once, divide the cost among many launches and many payloads. And in particular, now that the cost is going down, we can get to space cheaply. So the ticket to go to space has become more affordable. So this is actually how air travel started, right? When it first started, no one was flying on the planes. They were flying mail, similar to how we're launching satellites to space for launching people. And then as we get pretty confident with it and we're thinking that, this is pretty safe, then we start flying people. But it's very rich business travelers who, have the money to pay for it. But as time goes on, planes get more efficient and the ticket gets more cheaper. And now anyone can fly on a plane. Okay, almost anyone, but it's a lot more accessible than it was before. And that's really where aviation is going today, or space travel is going today. And I think that in our lifetime, we will all definitely be able to go to space, which is really, really exciting. And the important thing is that you can launch satellites really cheaply. So as a result of that, now there are many satellite startups that exist only because the costs are not astronomical. So this includes planetary imaging, right? So there are some companies, there's one in particular called Planet Labs. They build these really tiny CubeSats, these like small satellites that have a camera in it, and they have a constellation of hundreds of them in orbit, and they can image the whole Earth every single day. And they're only able to do that because to launch to space, it's significantly cheaper now. And you can also do stuff with satellite internet. So the idea is that you have a constellation of satellites in space, and they'll basically beam down internet all across the globe. So no matter where you are, you don't have to use a cell tower. You just have a satellite dish, and you can connect to any satellite in space. This is a pretty cool picture. This is actually the payload that goes inside of a Falcon 9 rocket. And if you see on the bottom, there are a bunch of satellites here. These are actually Starlink satellites that are launched by that are built and launched by SpaceX. And if you see on the top here, these are actually CubeSats or smaller sats for other companies. And now in a given launch, you can launch like literally 100 satellites all together in one small rocket. And you can have a bunch of payloads that go up into space. And this is all made possible because everything's getting cheaper. So like, how significant is this? I'm a bit biased, but personally, I believe we're witnessing the birth of a new industry. So this is the only thing comparable to this is maybe the late 90s with the internet. But right now we're at an inflection point and everything's going to take off. Like imagine 20 years ago, right? People were just coming up with the internet, the idea of like smartphones, and it was like a very new thing back then. Now imagine your life today without the internet. It's insane. The world is so dependent on it. And that's kind of where I feel that we're going to go. And in 100 years from now, we're going to have all this technology that's so integral with space that we can't imagine a world without it. And eventually, looking further long term, humanity is going to become multiplanetary. And it's probably going to be the most significant step forward in human history, because for a whole history, we've been confined to one Earth. But in the future, we're going to be across multiple planets, multiple solar systems, and eventually multiple galaxies. And today is the start of this. So we are really at the point where we're making history. So a bit about my path. For some reason, actually, I don't really know why, but I've always loved planes. I love aviation photography. Here's a picture of me taking a picture of a plane. This is some of the pictures I've taken. This one's in LA, I think. And I even collect model airplanes. So that's part of my collection that I have at home. I've always wanted to be involved with aerospace, and I took my first steps with them at the RSI actually. So when I was at RSI, I was able to work in an MIT Aero Astro Lab where I worked on a small actually an electric aircraft taxi, where the idea is that I can take off from a very short from the top of a tower, like at the top of a skyscraper, and I can fly short distances autonomously and electrically to go between routes. And actually, funny enough, this project ended up turning into one of the leading electric aviation startup out there. So I got to work on that, which is pretty cool. I also got to work on another project, which is for long range flying aircraft. So if you see this little drone, this is actually launched from the top of the roof of a car. And the goal is that it can stay in the air for 5 days at a time. And I worked on this and got to work with designing CAD models and running experiment tests for it. And the cool thing is that the professor who started this project, he ended up becoming a NASA astronaut, and he's flying on a spacecraft that I've worked on in a month. So after RSI, I graduated high school and then I went to university. And so right now I'm a junior at University of Michigan, which is in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And since I've been there, I've done two things. One is that I've joined my school's rocket team. So our goal in that project is to design and build a 6-foot tall nose cone for a space shuttle rocket. This is a rocket we're trying to launch to go to space. And we've built and tested the avionics hardware. I built and tested the avionics hardware for the rocket. And I also went and designed those nose cones. So if you see this big, tall structure here, I did all the work for that. And some of the work that includes is going in and designing, taking a drawing and figuring out what are the dimensions we have to have, how is everything going to fit together, and then actually going and building a computer model of it. Then we have to go simulate it. When we're flying at really high speeds, what is the temperature going to look like? What are the forces we're going to see? Is the thing going to break as we're going up in space? So we had to run all those calculations, and then we had to figure out, okay, how are we going to build it? We have to figure out how to make it out of metal. You have to weld it together. You have to roll it together. You have to fabricate this. What are all the steps we have to take to get this done? So that's what I worked on for this. And then another one, which if you see this green little chip here, this is a computer board where we had to design a lot of the circuits that went on it, and then take micro circuits and then solder those pieces on and do all the testing for it to make sure that this computer board works as intended. And additionally, I also work at a research lab where I'm designing and building a new system for horizontal and vertical propulsion. So this will, based on the research, we'll be able to see if this can be used in those applications for urban air mobility to build more efficient air taxis. So as useful as classes are, I have learned as much, if not more, through projects outside of class. So I would highly recommend really doing those projects. So in terms of internship experience, I can't really talk about what I did at my internships, but as a general overview, I worked this summer at Blue Origin. I was doing avionics hardware for the New Glenn rocket, which is their massive super rocket they're going to try to launch satellites on. So I was out in Seattle doing that, and I was designing and analyzing circuits for PCB boards. And a lot of interesting details that go into this. So because if you're trying to launch something, we use hardware that you're going to be reusing many times and sending to a very harsh environment, you got to think, okay, over the course of 10 years, how is the resistor going to decay? How is this component going to decay? And you have to do all that analysis to make sure that what you're designing is built to last for the future. Additionally, I worked at SpaceX this past fall on the Dragon team. So I was a launch intern. So I was living in Cape Canaveral. I was in the clean room every day. I had to put on a bunny suit and hairnet and everything. And I was sitting inside of the spacecraft trying to diagnose real-time issues and get the spacecraft ready for flight. And that's actually going to launch in a month now. And it's pretty cool because I got to see all those launches. So I know Mary Beth talked about Artemis launching. I got to even see that launch, and that was really awesome. And then this coming summer, I'll be working again at SpaceX on the Starship team. So I talked about that super massive rocket. Actually, it's right behind me in this picture here. But I'll be working on that team out in California and Texas. Okay, so a bit of advice for aerospace engineers. So this advice typically goes for actually just all engineers. And the important thing is that whatever you choose to study, aerospace takes all fields of engineers. So whether it's aerospace engineering, mechanical, chemistry, electrical, software, finance, supply chain, operations, literally everything. It takes so many different disciplines, because if you think about it, there's so many things that go into building a rocket. It's not just aerospace engineering. So even me with example, I'm a aerospace engineer by training, but all the work I've done has been electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, and overall just general problem solving. So when I was working in Florida on Dragon, we had to deal with we had to deal with many problems in a day. So at 10 o'clock, we would be trying to solve a corrosion problem. And then in the afternoon, we're figuring out an issue with the electrical harness. So you really just have to know general problem solving skills and a lot of the technical knowledge you can learn along the way. And especially with our panelists here, we have like people from many different backgrounds. So really aerospace is just a diverse place to go to be in. I think other advice is, really focus on learning fundamental knowledge in class, but really devote time to applying it in projects. So I worked in a research lab and a rocket team, but I know there are many other project teams out there. So there's many universities have electric or solar car teams or Baja off-road buggy teams, really doing anything that's really hands-on and gets your hands dirty. That's, the most important thing to do to get internships and jobs and, really learn a lot. And lastly, just general advice, time is pretty finite. So wherever you go, you'll have too many options. The hard part is being selective. Additionally, show, don't tell. It's one thing to say that you'll get something done, and another thing to actually get it done. So just put your head down, maniacally focus, and deliver results. Additionally, 100% quality is respected, 90% quality is expected, but 80% quality won't even be remembered. So really try to achieve as high as possible. And lastly, second to last, make mistakes quick and early on and learn from them super fast, but don't be afraid to keep making mistakes. Because if you're being perfect, you're not progressing. And lastly, consider all options thoroughly, but when it comes time to make a decision, act fast and commit and don't ever look back.
Of that passion and enthusiasm. I think that you have a lot of students who are in this webinar right now who kind of feel similarly about like model planes and aerospace and that entire industry. So I wanted to give space for the speakers to kind of voice over some of the answers to questions we have in the chat already. And then there are 6 so far, and then there are 4 that are answered. So this is our time for question and answers. I want to kind of like pass that over to you guys and see which ones you really think you have something that you want to respond to.
I can jump in because I have to hop off in just a couple minutes. But a bunch of people were asking, or several different people were asking about opportunities for high schoolers who are looking to get internships. And this may be counterintuitive advice, but I've found that if you follow your passions, even if it's not necessarily exactly what you want to be doing, it will help contribute to your future success in some way. So in high school, I was actually a rocket contest participant, but other than that, did no STEM. I liked physics and liked science, but didn't really think it was for me. And I was a theater kid. And that experience is what makes me good at my job. That experience, learning by doing, learning by failing, being in unexpected situations and just kind of be like, okay, this is where we are now. We're going to deal with it, is why I'm a good mission control specialist. And so I think it's really important to follow your passions, follow what you love, and sort of let that inform your career in addition to sort of taking that career path really seriously. Those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. And if you love sports, let that teach you about teamwork and being on a team and being a leader. If you love theater, let that teach you about the beauty that is art and dealing with unexpected problems. So really don't feel like, particularly in high school, you have to limit yourself to just looking at things that would be sort of really clearly defined as aerospace or STEM. Let life take you where it's going to take you and sort of embrace that path. And yes, that is my advice and my parting words to y'all. But as I said, please feel free to reach out to me via email or LinkedIn. I'm really happy to answer all of your questions, and I wish y'all a good weekend and a wonderful rest of the panel. I'm sorry I have to leave a little early.
That's awesome advice.
Agreed, Grace. And just to piggyback off that, I think I see sort of where you all are at is this like fact-finding mission of what you like, what you don't like, what skills you feel like you need to develop. No one expects you to come in on day one. And I think this was a question that came in, and have it all figured out or know everything with any type of internship. You know, there are expectations, but also there's expectations on the employer to help you learn and help you grow. So really taking advantage of those opportunities to ask questions and find a mentor and really grow yourself during those. I think Grace had a really great point of everything is a learning experience. So if you have one internship and you don't think it's quite a good fit, you learn something that you might not want to do moving forward in the future. So taking those lessons learned from each experience you have or each conversation you have helps get you a little closer to what it might be that you want to do long term, knowing that that could change, and it probably will, and that's okay. And that's sort of part of everyone's career exploration journey.
Yeah, 100%. Every, like, I've learned things from like so many unexpected things, from irrelevant stuff that doesn't matter at all to engineering, but it's so useful. Like as Grace said, just figuring out, okay, we're in this position, how do we problem solve and get out of this? That's one of the most useful things you could do.
Rocky's question about sort of the mentality going into these internships. Like a lot of the technical stuff that you were learning, it sounds really complex, but how did you kind of like navigate that field? I know you had an interest in it before, but getting there and actually being in those experiences.
Yeah, a lot of it is fairly technically complex. I would, I guess, just try to say, like, at a very high level, really try to look at a problem and try to zero in on how to try to solve it. So I assume you guys, you may be doing math homework and you have to solve for the quadratic root of something. I don't really know what math class you guys are. You're probably doing more complex stuff, but you at least just try to zero in and figure out what are all the things we need to know. What is the quadratic formula? What are the variables? What are the coefficients? And you got to try to really zero in and figure the steps out, and then really try to hit, okay, first we got to do this, then we got to do this, then we got to do this. And like that, when you're trying to learn stuff for, trying to design a rocket system, it's the same thing. You got to think, okay, we're building a satellite. What are the things we need to know? Okay, we need to build a structure that can hold it. We need to build a communication system so they can talk about it. We need to build a thermal system so the thing doesn't melt. So you have to break it into its problems. And then at every single problem, you'll have to pose a question and think, okay, what is the cheapest way we can design something such that it doesn't break, or such that it doesn't melt or get crushed? And you'll start asking those more and more detailed technical questions. When you pose those, you can start looking at an equation that will tell you the answer, and you can eventually answer each of those ones. Now, I guess more like specifically about like navigating that, I think coursework for one will teach you a lot of useful technical knowledge you need to know. I think thing is intuition. You can't really, you don't necessarily get from learning an equation, but you get that by really going out and doing stuff. So if you really try to just go out and say, hey, let me build a model rocket, right, for AIA's launch competition. By doing that, you really have to think, like, you don't necessarily know, okay, well, I know the equation of stress. Now you think, okay, what material can I use that will maximize the strength, but at the same time is light enough so that the rocket can go high? So you'll have to start asking those questions, and you gain that intuition by really just doing stuff.
Can you talk a little bit more about the rocket competition? I know that's something that a lot of the students are going to be really excited about.
Absolutely, would be happy to. So I will share rocketcontest.org. I believe I will fact check that while I'm talking here. Is a website you can learn more about the American Rocketry Challenge, open to all middle and high school students in small teams. So it starts in the summer timeframe. I would say you register by December of that year, and then have throughout the spring to do your test flights in anticipation of the national finals in each May here in Virginia. So happy to chat more. We have a fabulous program management team at AIA that is helping students and teams through that process, but really just wanting to provide space for students, I was going to say faculty, but that's too higher ed, their teachers or mentors on their campus at their high schools or middle schools, as well as some folks in the local community that are doing this work every day to come together and really think about, what is engineering, what is STEM, what does rocketry look like? We have some fabulous partners. The National Association of Rocketry is one of those that provide helpful toolkits of the how-to. So if you know nothing about rocketry, I would have been in your boat when I was in high school. There's such a wealth of helpful resources to help get started. So happy for anyone that's interested, or if there are any educators on to chat more about that or connect you with folks at AIA can help you form a team for next year.
Awesome. And this is for the students. If you guys come to Virginia and do this rocketry challenge, I will definitely come check it out. Like, that is something I want to see. So I'm trying to look at the chat and see some other questions. Can either of you speak towards some internships you did that weren't necessarily RSI while in high school? I know that a lot of students are kind of starting to do that early preparation and thinking about ways they can get involved.
Yeah, so I can speak to it a bit from the industry perspective. So I think, your local area is the best place you're probably going to find it, just knowing logistics or things like that. So I just did a quick Google of high school aerospace internships, and there's a whole list that comes up. You can put your zip code in. NASA runs a program every year, but I know they have some age requirements. So I think it's just for seniors in high school that are eligible to participate in that. But many of our member companies have high school internships or work with individual students in their areas. If you go to a high school that has an experiential learning component of your curriculum, they're able to work with you to have exposure within the business without necessarily committing to a long period or things like that. So I'd be happy to connect folks individually. My contact information was earlier, but happy to share that with anyone for specific companies or areas that you might be interested in. I will say we primarily focus on US businesses, so can't provide too much help for, I know we have a few Canadian friends, but would be happy to, help you discern out what's useful as you start looking through what some of those corporate sponsored internships might look like.
Yeah, I guess outside of RSI, so the lab I worked at when I was at RSI, I also worked in that lab the previous summer. I actually literally just found a professor who was doing an interview on the news, and I emailed him and I asked to work there that summer, and I just showed up to his office and we talked, and then that's how I worked there that summer doing research for him. And I would just recommend, go be proactive. If you see something, even if, there's not a link that says high school students apply here, just reach out. More often than not, they'll respond to you. And, the worst they'll say is no, but there's a chance, very small chance that they might say, yeah, come over, do some stuff. So that's really a big thing. I know NASA does have the high school internship thing. I never knew about that. I wish I'd known about that. But I think, yeah, there is an age requirement for that. As far as corporate internships go, most of those are generally at the university level. And in fact, most of them are even like university juniors and above, which is kind of stupid, but it takes quite a while to get them to read your resume. But really, I guess I think the best one as high schoolers is like research internships. And even if you can't find research to do, I would just go and do your own project. So one of the things I did in high school was I was building this electrical engineering project that was a pair of glasses that had ultrasonic sensors, and they use vibration and sound to help blind people see. And that was not through any research institution, but it was just my own thing that I found Amazon parts and started building on my own. And you learn a lot from that, and that's really helpful because you get that critical problem solving skills and a lot of the technical knowledge just by building those kinds of things. One other thing I will mention is, I know some people here are looking at the chat, there's a lot of people outside of the US. Unfortunately, the US aerospace industry the US government has this rule called ITAR, which means that they export restrict a lot of the technology. So if you were to work at a place like SpaceX or Boeing or Northrop Grumman, a lot of those will have restrictions on they can only hire US citizens, which is really unfortunate. But that being said, there are aerospace companies that do take international students. So as you're looking at different companies, really make sure to go and try to like really be proactive. Don't get bogged down by that, and try to like look for some positions, because there's a select positions that will open up for international people. And the last thing is that a lot of the stuff you do in aerospace, even though it's cool to work on planes and rockets and missiles, at the same time, a lot of the same knowledge is applied in other industries. So if you look at the automotive industry, a lot of the same things we do in aerospace are used in automotive. So you can go work at Tesla, you can work at GM, Ford, or even if you can go work at Google or Microsoft and Amazon. A lot of these companies are doing the same engineering work, so it's really good to get experience in any field.
I think that's a really good transition point, because someone asked if either of you could talk about some of the different jobs and careers that are in the aerospace industry. So we talked a bit about some of them, and just kind of giving an overview. If you're thinking about like a high school freshman who knows that they're really, really into space, they're really, really into rocketry, what is something that they can start with? What are some careers that they can start with?
Really, any type of career you could imagine has a place within aerospace. So if you want to be working on the more technical side of things, exploring what certain engineering degrees look like. So if you're looking for colleges, do they have an aerospace engineering program if that's what you're looking for? Or electrical, mechanical, some of those really, like hard science-based degrees, that's the way to go. There's also a host of, mathematics degrees that get used, stats, modeling, coding, really just everything from that sort of STEM perspective. But also if you want something on the more creative side, every company has, PR teams and comms and policy like what I do. Or there are opportunities as well for folks that don't want to go the degree as well. So there are credentials. Cyber is something that is a really growing area within the aerospace industry that companies are moving away from 4-year degree requirements for. So there's lots of great boot camps and credentials out there for that. Thinking through coding, things like that. Or if you are more of a hands-on worker, there are tons of machinist and technician roles, quality assurance and quality control, that there are likely some great local programs in your area that can help you get into without having to go for a degree. And it's a good segue into the industry as you figure out sort of where your place it is.
Yeah, totally. It's there's not really much to add there. It's so many, there's so many different fields that are used in aerospace. It goes from even the engineering to the non-engineering, even finance. There's a ton of roles for supply chain planning, because think about the number of parts you use to build a rocket. Not only the rocket, but the system that builds the rocket and launches the rocket. There is even in non-engineering fields, there's so much that's useful. And at least through my internships, I was working with aerospace engineers, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers. But one person I worked with was a meteorologist. His degree was in meteorology, but he was really good at just going and solving problems. And we work with a lot of technicians too. And a lot of these people, they went and worked in the Navy for 5 years, and they were commanding submarines and operating a lot of the missile equipment there. Yet they're extremely skilled at going and fixing spacecraft. So really, anything that you do, it has some application to the industry.
And it kind of gives a way to approach this field from a lot of different perspectives. And I'm kind of looking through the chat, and those are a lot of the questions that we have. I'm curious how long before we can expect the Ubers, the flying Ubers. I want to hear about that specifically.
I'm patiently holding my breath. I would be all over that. We'll see when certification comes through. So
yeah,
TBD.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think the technology it's not fully there, but it's more or less there. It's the regulation that's pushing it back. So a lot of flying Ubers, they have to go and use pilots because the regulation for using autonomy is just not there right now.
This is a really broad overview of most of the questions. I want to give maybe a minute or two for people to put last minute things into our Q&A function. Maybe we'll have some last minute questions pop up. And if not, I'm going to talk about some of the other things we can look forward to with STEM Lyceums.
Do you want me to answer a couple of the technical questions?
I do. I think that they would really like that.
Yeah, these are really good questions, by the way. You guys are in high school? Nice. These are the right questions to be asking. Okay. So one of them is how long do the satellites stay functional for? Great question. It depends on the satellite. If you have a really small satellite like a CubeSat, oftentimes these satellites don't actually have propulsion systems. So if you think about space, there's actually no fine line where there's air and there's no air. The air actually just gets less and less dense until eventually it's insignificant. But a lot of these satellites in low Earth orbit, they experience air drag. So eventually, if they're in space, they're going to come back and crash, like deorbit and burn in the atmosphere. So if it's a smaller satellite, sometimes it can spend 6 to 8 months. If it's a satellite that actually has a propulsion system where it can propel itself, then it could stay as long as the propulsion system dies, so the rest of the satellite dies. But really, if you look at, I guess, just overall satellites, like I think, for example, Starlink, its lifespan is like 5 to 10 years. But obviously, one of the coolest things in space industry right now is a lot of companies that are like defining themselves as the AAA of satellites. So if your satellite breaks down in space, you spend all the money to do it. Why don't you just call a repair company? They'll send another satellite out. They'll go attach to the satellite, fix it, maybe put a new battery in, maybe swap out one of the computers, and get your satellite back and operational. Because if your car breaks down, why are you going to buy a new car? Just fix the car. So that's one thing. Okay, great question. So if you add if you add a payload, you need to add more fuel, but then the fuel adds more weight and so on. So it's kind of like a positive feedback loop. So is there an optimal fuel to payload ratio? Wow, nice. Yes, there is. There's a rocket equation, and there's a lot of variables that you can modify, but eventually you're going to have a polynomial relation where you have an optimal point, and that basically tells you the best payload mass to fuel ratio. Actually, it's literally exactly that. But oftentimes, what what you can do to really fine tune that optimal point is by changing some of the things like, if you have a certain amount of fuel, can you get more energy out of the fuel? And that's the whole, that's why, chemical engineering and material engineering is so valuable in aerospace, because a lot of people are trying to figure out how can we squeeze performance out of every single drop of fuel? How can we use chemicals that generate more energy when combusted? So those are some of the small things you want to try to modify. Wouldn't it cost more money to send a satellite to repair the dysfunctional satellite? Great question. So the one option is, the idea is that at scale, if you have so many of them, if you have these satellites that are already in space and just going around and orbiting, and they have the tools there, then yeah, you can. It will be relatively cheaper to go and fix a satellite. That being said, yes, typically, today it's cheaper to just launch a bunch of satellites. So when you look at when SpaceX launches Starlink, they launch 54 satellites in one go. And oftentimes some of the satellites, they don't even work. They die out and they fall back to Earth. But the idea is that you keep launching so many of them. It's like you keep launching so many of them that eventually a decent proportion will survive. Can anyone build a CubeSat? Because at BWI summer program, yeah, offered by my team. Yeah. So you can build it. Anyone can really build a CubeSat. Obviously, it is expensive. You do have to pay for a launch, which can go towards the millions of dollars, but you can get and you can definitely get it to work. So maybe not individual people in high school building a CubeSat, that might not be possible, but universities have labs where they're doing that. So my roommate works at my university's lab, and they've just recently launched a CubeSat a few weeks ago that's orbiting right now. So yeah, the accessibility to build CubeSats is really there. I think that should be it.
You have a really interactive chat with you. So one person said, wouldn't it cost more money to send a satellite than to repair the dysfunctional one?
Oh yeah, I think I might have already answered that, but yeah, it would. Once you have it at scale where there's a bunch of satellites already there, that it would make sense to use it. But right now, yeah, because it hasn't been built up yet, the infrastructure isn't built up yet, it's cheaper to just send a new one.
Okay. Are there any last minute questions? That one was at 5:44. So if not, I am so happy that you guys gained so much from this. It was really, really cool to see how people are interacting with our speakers. Over to our last couple slides, which is just reminding you guys what all we have to offer you guys at STEM Lyceums. I also really want to thank our speakers for taking the time and coming here today. It was absolutely phenomenal to listen to all of your learning experiences. It's amazing to listen to your learning experiences. And I want to say an amazing shout out to the STEM Lyceums. I've been here for a month, and this is the first event that I put on, and just going and getting the word out and kind of interacting with so many people and getting the word out about this webinar has been phenomenal. We have 2 events coming up. So one of them is on March 10th, and that's STEM on the Hill. So if you know, the Center for Excellence in Education is located in McLean, Virginia, which is right outside of DC, Capitol Hill. So if you're interested in like data, like policy, quantitative analytics, my old professor from college is coming to speak, and she is one of the most amazing people I've ever met in my life. So there's a QR code to register, and also I'll be interacting with you guys, sending you an update about that. And then on Earth Day, we're going to be talking about engineering a sustainable future. So all of these fields in STEM are incredibly interdisciplinary, but I know a lot of you guys are really environmentally conscious. So I want to give you the chance to kind of interact with all of the new updates and innovations that are in sustainability and environmentalism. And that's going to be a really cool event on April 21st. That I wanted to say thank you to everybody for coming out. Thank you so much again to our amazing speakers, and all of you students will be hearing from me in the future.